he has the authority for it. You know, the requirement is that for a member of the Fed governing board to be removed, it has to be for cause. Now, that's not specifically defined, but it means that they have to have done something wrong. And the standard to be able to show that you've actually engaged in mortgage fraud, which is essentially what Bill Pulte and President Trump are accusing her of, is very high. You know, she actually has to have done something knowingly that has actually harmed the lender. In this case, I think that's really too high a bar for them to pass.
Okay, so let's talk about how the late night decision played into the global markets today.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern. You know, part of the problem that we have, and I'm asked this question a lot, is how can the markets be doing so well when there are all these issues out there? And, you know, we've kind of got a bifurcation going on. On the one hand, you've got so much enthusiasm over AI and the potential that is there. And so you see, like, for example, NVIDIA getting such unbelievably high valuations. And there are some of the other large companies, large tech companies, that are really benefiting from this, like Microsoft, for example. But when you look at the rest of the market actually isn't doing so well. Were it not for the incredible investment that we're getting in AI, the rest of the market's not doing so well. And I would be interested, I haven't seen yet kind of an analysis that has looked specifically at just the rest of the market, excluding AI, the impact of this. And my guess is that it will actually be stronger than we're seeing indications of so far.
Interesting. Okay, so how will this factor in, do you think, to the central bank's next interest rate meeting? And what do you believe the president's long-term goal for the Fed is?
Well, clearly the president's long-term goal is he wants to take it over and basically use it as his own tool. And we know from history that that doesn't work very well for the United States. I mean, back when President Nixon was in office, there actually was an effort by President Nixon to push the Fed to lower interest rates before an election. And as a result of that, that's part of the big reason why we had such out-of-control high inflation throughout the 1970s, which resulted in a terrible recession in the beginning of the 1980s to put an end to it. So we know what will happen if the Fed becomes politicized, and unfortunately, that's what he intends to do. You know, I think that among the Fed governors, there's a real concern here. You know, they view, generally speaking, including both Lisa Cook and Jay Powell, view their responsibility very seriously, and know that their decisions have a great impact on the economy as a whole. So they want to make sure that they are making decisions independent of politics. And unfortunately, though, that's not something that President Trump is going to tolerate. And his goal seems to be to put in his MAGA supporters throughout the Fed until he has enough votes there to be able to essentially do with interest rates what he wants, which I got to tell you is something that anybody who's concerned about inflation and about the certainty of the U.S. market as a good investment is something that people should be concerned about.
Okay, you talk about the being independent of politics. So let's talk about the potential consequences of government involvement in the central bank, because if you think about Turkey, it comes to mind. A simply tumultuous time recently for that nation because its president got involved in the economy. Could something like that happen here?
I do think that's the case. And here's the problem. As I say, we saw it in the 1970s. And people who, like me, who are old enough to remember that, remember what a hard period that was in terms of inflation. Really was a period of stagflation because we also had high gas prices as a result of the Iranian Revolution. But we went through a terrible recession at the beginning of the 1980s to try to get those inflation expectations under control, where you had the Fed chair at that point kind of step up, and despite pressure from presidents say, no, we are going to get inflation under control no matter what it takes. And the United States went through one of the worst recessions we've had since the Great Depression, you know, because that's what it took to kind of get rid of those inflation expectations that had been baked into the economy. My concern is that could happen here, because as you point out, that happened in Turkey very recently. And we have other examples of this. Argentina as well. You know, the problem we have is politicians are driven by kind of this short-term need to get reelected. And what they want to do is that they want to come into an election with a good, strong economy. And there's no faster way to get an economy to be strong than to lower interest rates. Essentially, you're flooding the economy with money and creating, obviously, job opportunities and whatever. But as a result of that, though, what it also does is devalues the currency because you've got more money in the economy than you necessarily can use in productive purposes. And as a result of that, what you start seeing is inflation. And once that people start to expect that inflation is going to happen, that's when it gets so hard to wring out of the economy.
Yeah. Michael Greiner, good stuff. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.